What if I told you that the woman who saved France was deliberately handed over to her enemies by the very people she trusted most? Today we're diving into one of history's most shocking betrayals, where political ambition, religious manipulation, and royal cowardice combined to destroy a teenage peasant girl who had already achieved the impossible. Most people think they know the story of Joan of Arc. French peasant girl hears voices from God, convinces the Dauphin to give her an army, lifts the siege of Orléans, gets captured by the English, and burns at the stake. Case closed, right? Wrong. What really happened is so much darker, so much more calculated, and involves betrayals at the highest levels of French society that historians have spent centuries trying to uncover the truth. I spent months digging through medieval court records, Inquisition documents, and scholarly research to piece together what really happened. And what I discovered will fundamentally change how you see not just Joan of Arc, but the entire political and religious power structure of medieval Europe. Let's start with the moment everything went wrong. May 23rd, 1430, outside the walls of Compiègne. Joan of Arc, now 19 years old and at the height of her military success, is leading a sortie against Burgundian forces besieging the city. But something strange happens during the retreat. The gates of Compiègne close just a little too early. Joan, fighting at the rear to protect her men, suddenly finds herself cut off from safety. Within minutes, she's pulled from her horse by Burgundian soldiers. The Maid of Orleans, who had seemed invincible for over a year, is now a prisoner. But here's where the story gets interesting. This wasn't just bad luck or poor timing. Evidence suggests this capture was orchestrated, planned, and executed by people Joan considered allies. Who were these traitors? Let's examine the suspects one by one, because this conspiracy reaches into the very heart of medieval power. First we have Guillaume de Flavy, the commander of Compiègne. He's the man who gave the order to close the gates, leaving Joan stranded outside. Officially, he claimed he was protecting the city from being overrun, but Guillaume had been having secret negotiations with the Burgundians for weeks before Joan's capture. Documents discovered centuries later reveal he had been promised significant territories and titles in exchange for cooperation. But Guillaume was just the instrument. The real orchestrator was someone much more powerful, someone Joan had trusted completely, Georges de la Trémoille, the chief advisor to the Dauphin. La Trémoille had initially supported Joan because she served his political purposes. But by 1430, Joan had become a problem. She was too independent, too popular with the common people, and most dangerously, she was pushing for an immediate march on Paris that would have disrupted La Trémoille's careful diplomatic negotiations with the Burgundians. La Trémoille had been secretly working toward a separate peace with Burgundy, one that would maintain his own power, but potentially leave large parts of France under foreign control. Joan's vision of complete French liberation threatened everything he had built. So he made a choice that would haunt French history. He decided Joan had to go, but the betrayal goes even deeper than French court politics. The English, who desperately wanted Joan eliminated, had put a massive bounty on her head, 10,000 livres, an astronomical sum for the time. But they were smart about it. They didn't just want her killed on the battlefield where she could become a martyr. They wanted her destroyed, delegitimized, proven to be a heretic and a fraud. Enter the University of Paris and the French Inquisition. Here's where the story becomes truly sinister. The Inquisition wasn't some foreign institution imposed on France. These were French clerics, French theologians, French nobles who made the conscious decision to collaborate with the English occupiers to destroy their own countrywoman. The leader of this ecclesiastical betrayal was Pierre Cauchon, Bishop of Beauvais. Cauchon wasn't just any bishop. He was a hardcore collaborator who had fled to English-controlled territory and made his career serving foreign masters. When the opportunity arose to try Joan for heresy, Cauchon jumped at the chance, not because he genuinely believed she was a heretic, but because destroying Joan would secure his position with the English and eliminate a threat to the established order he served. But Cauchon couldn't act alone. He needed the backing of the University of Paris, the most prestigious theological institution in Europe. And here's where the betrayal becomes truly shameful. The university agreed. The same institution that should have been defending French interests instead chose to legitimize what was essentially a show trial designed by France's enemies. Why would French religious authorities collaborate in destroying Joan? The answer reveals the ugly truth about medieval power structures. Joan represented something terrifying to the established order, the idea that God might speak directly to ordinary people, bypassing the entire ecclesiastical hierarchy. If a peasant girl could receive divine revelation, what did that say about the necessity of bishops, abbots, and church bureaucrats? Moreover, Joan's success challenged fundamental assumptions about gender, class, and authority. She wore men's clothing, commanded nobles, and claimed direct access to divine will. Every aspect of her existence threatened the careful social order that kept medieval elites in power. The trial that followed Joan's capture was a masterpiece of legal manipulation and political theatre. The English paid for it, Cauchon orchestrated it, and the University of Paris provided academic cover for it. But the proceedings revealed just how desperate they were to destroy Joan's credibility. They couldn't charge her with military crimes because her victories were too obvious. They couldn't accuse her of moral corruption because her personal conduct was irreproachable, so they focused on technicalities: her refusal to submit to church authority, her insistence on wearing male clothing, and her claim that she could distinguish between the voices of saints and demons. The trial records, which survive to this day, show a 19-year-old girl facing down a room full of learned theologians and canon lawyers, all determined to trap her into condemning herself. What's remarkable is how well she held up under this pressure. Time and again, Joan demonstrated a theological sophistication that amazed even her enemies. When they tried to trap her by asking whether she was in a state of grace, she gave one of the most brilliant answers in legal history: "If I am not, may God put me there. If I am, may God keep me there." This response was so clever that it stopped the interrogation cold. If she claimed to be in grace, they could accuse her of presumption. If she admitted doubt, they could claim God had abandoned her. Her answer made both accusations impossible. But the fix was in from the beginning. The judges had already decided her fate before the first question was asked. The University of Paris had issued opinions declaring her revelations demonic. The English were paying the bills and demanding results. And the French collaborators were determined to prove their loyalty to their foreign masters. Even when Joan finally broke under torture and briefly recanted her claims, they couldn't let her live. She had served her purpose as a symbol of resistance for too long. When she resumed wearing men's clothing in prison, whether from fear, defiance, or simply lack of alternatives, they had their excuse to declare her a relapsed heretic and sentence her to death. But here's the most damning evidence of the conspiracy: what happened after Joan's execution. If she had truly been a dangerous heretic, if her voices had really been demonic, then her death should have ended the matter. Instead, within months of her burning, the political situation began shifting dramatically in France's favor. Charles, the Dauphin Joan had crowned, suddenly found the resources and will to mount a serious campaign against the English. The same nobles who had abandoned Joan to her fate began winning victories. It was almost as if removing Joan had eliminated not a threat to France, but an obstacle to certain powerful people's plans. The most telling evidence comes from what happened 25 years later. In 1455, Pope Calixtus III authorized a retrial of Joan's case. This wasn't just a formality or a gesture of rehabilitation. Church authorities had discovered evidence that the original trial had been fundamentally corrupt, that witnesses had been intimidated, that legal procedures had been violated, and that the entire process had been designed to reach a predetermined conclusion. The retrial revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Testimony from participants in the original trial painted a picture of systematic intimidation and manipulation. Several judges admitted they had been pressured to find Joan guilty. Key witnesses revealed they had been threatened or bribed. The entire facade of legitimate religious authority crumbled under examination. But perhaps the most damning revelation was this. Many of the same French nobles and clerics who had abandoned Joan to the English were quick to claim credit for her successes once the political winds changed. La Tremoille, who had arguably orchestrated her capture, spent his later years boasting about his role in Joan's early victories. Cauchon's collaborators suddenly remembered their French patriotism when English power began to wane. The retrial officially declared Joan innocent and proclaimed her a martyr. But this vindication came too late for Joan herself, and it couldn't undo the damage that had been done to the very concept of loyalty and honor in medieval France. So who really betrayed Joan of Arc? The answer is almost everyone in a position to save her. The French court that used her when convenient and abandoned her when she became inconvenient. The religious authorities who put institutional preservation ahead of justice. The military commanders who prioritized their own advancement over loyalty to their most successful leader. But the deepest betrayal may have come from the very system that created the need for someone like Joan in the first place. Medieval France was a society so corrupt, so riddled with competing loyalties and conflicting interests, that it took a teenage peasant girl claiming divine revelation to accomplish what the established leadership had failed to do for generations. Joan succeeded not because the system worked, but because she operated outside the system entirely. She bypassed the normal chains of command, ignored traditional social hierarchies, and appealed directly to popular French nationalism at a time when the concept barely existed among the elite. This is why she had to be destroyed. Joan's example suggested that ordinary people, guided by conscience and conviction, could achieve what trained professionals and established authorities could not. This was a lesson that medieval power structures could not allow to stand. The tragedy of Joan of Arc isn't just that she was betrayed by individuals seeking personal advantage, it's that she was betrayed by an entire system of power that viewed her success as more dangerous than French defeat. Her betrayers weren't just cowards or opportunists. They were the logical products of a social order that prioritized stability over justice, procedure over results, and institutional preservation over national survival. Understanding Joan's betrayal helps explain not just medieval politics, but the dynamics of power in any era. Those who threaten established hierarchies by demonstrating alternative approaches to leadership and authority will always face resistance from those who benefit from existing arrangements, regardless of how corrupt or ineffective those arrangements might be. The secret case of the Inquisition against Joan of Arc reveals something profound about human nature and political power. It shows how easily justice can be perverted when institutional interests align against an individual, no matter how righteous their cause or remarkable their achievements. Joan of Arc was betrayed not by her enemies but by her allies, not by foreigners but by her fellow French citizens, not by the ignorant but by the educated and sophisticated. Her story serves as a permanent warning about the fragility of honor and loyalty when they conflict with power and self-interest. In the end, Joan's greatest victory may not have been lifting the siege of Orleans or crowning the Dauphin at Reims. It may have been forcing her betrayers to reveal their true nature, creating a historical record that exposes the moral bankruptcy of those who chose personal advancement over national survival and institutional preservation over individual justice. The girl who saved France was destroyed by the very France she had saved, but her destruction illuminated truths about power, loyalty, and courage that continue to resonate centuries later. Joan of Arc's betrayal remains one of history's most shocking examples of how societies can turn on their greatest heroes when those heroes become inconvenient to the powerful. That's the real secret of Joan of Arc's case. She wasn't just betrayed by individuals seeking advantage, but by an entire civilization that couldn't tolerate the implications of her success.